So yeah, I guess it's more of well, it's yeah. I'll let you take that however you want to take it.
Yeah, that's a pretty hot start.
Funnels and metrics, watch them converge. Data and insight where the truths emerge. Verses like bullets, sharp and fleet. Marketing game strong, you can't be beat.
Welcome to ABM Answered, a very special episode of ABM Answered, the quickfire ABM Demand Generation video series. I'm here again with Henry, who was the second guest on ABM Answered. So when this blows up, that'll be quite monumental. Henry was like a core foundation to the building blocks of this. I don't know if you want to give an intro, because you've moved since we started, haven't we?
Sure, yeah. I'm Henry. I'm currently the senior manager of account-based marketing and campaigns, a cybersecurity company called SecurityHQ. I was the manager of ABM at Lilt, so that was a generative AI company beforehand when I spoke to you, the Garage episode. And yeah, I've been kind of working in ABM for around about 5 years. I came up through a sales background, so very kind of more interested in the sales side, I would say, than the kind of digital marketing side, but enjoy all aspects of ABM, really.
Nice, yes. And Henry's been invited back because he's just a maestro when it comes to account-based marketing. And for this episode, what we're going to do is something a bit different. Instead of basing the challenges and questions off data we've collected in mixed reality rooms, we're actually going to ask Henry the questions and challenges from our previous guests. So it's a bit different. It could go horribly wrong, but we'll give it a go. But yeah, you ready to kind of kick off?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So question one came in from guest three, Ilyana Sipka, and she asked, this is a bit of a controversial one, how should marketing deal with unenthusiastic BDRs who ruin marketing's work? So yeah, I guess it's more of, I'll let you take that however you want to take it.
Yeah, that's a pretty hot start. Well, I think you got to kind of categorize them into two buckets, I suppose. There's the unenthusiastic BDR that is there in a good environment and just is unenthusiastic and probably isn't cut out for sales. It's probably one of the tougher jobs, in my opinion, out there in tech. You have to grind quite hard. And so if they haven't got that kind of spirit to grind straight away, then that's fine. You just got to let them go, essentially. Yeah. But then I would say that, especially I worked as a BDR and now kind of have a heavy hand in BDR functions. A lot of the time, the systems are set up in a way kind of against them. And it's easy to get demoralized as a BDR because you're toiling so much. And if that is coming to no gain, or if it's coming to, basically a kind of abrupt halt at certain points, then it's easy to get demoralized. So you've got to kind of figure out whether the system is against them, put them in a position to succeed, and then you can finally figure out which ones are invested and which ones are not invested.
Yeah, we're out to hurt them, aren't we, as marketers?
Yeah.
I think every marketer should do some sales job at some point in their life. This next question, Ollie Parsons, your good friend, Ollie Parsons, more of a sales guy, but he asked, what do marketing truly believe is a good conversion rate for their leads?
It depends on the lead. That's Ollie all over. It depends on the lead. I mean, you're kind of looking at, it depends job to job. I mean, we had a higher close rate at Lilt than we do currently at SecurityHQ, and that's not necessarily down to the teams or any of the systems inside. It's due to the fact that we sold a generative AI product at Lilt at the kind of peak of generative AI, and so almost you couldn't set up a system to fail in that company at that time. So you're looking, I would say, between a 20 and 30% close rate off any leads that get to stage 0, stage 1, qualified kind of stage, whatever you call that. But then in terms of like MQLs and all that kind of stuff, I think sometimes it's quite hard to track. And really, you're just trying to put people in good positions when we get through that sales cycle.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Ollie's kind of stitched us up there with that one, hasn't he?
Yeah.
The next one was from George Ford. So he asked, how do you manage, so he's very technical, but how do you manage strategic light and programmatic ad campaigns at the same time? So, yeah.
Well, that's kind of like the crux of ABM, really, isn't it? That's what everyone wants to talk about. I think what I talk about an awful lot is creating an account list so that everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet. That's kind of like a lot of people don't necessarily, you talk about the bells and whistles and what you do when you find the right people, but then the biggest question has always been, in my mind, who are you actually sending those things to and who are you spending that time on? Once you have kind of a good scoring system to identify accounts, then you can make sure that sales and marketing are working those accounts at the same time. And you have, without kind of a whole lot of communication between the accounts, they're just working off the same list. You have a certain amount of marketing and sales support going out to at least your top accounts, and then probably down to your top 200, top 500 maybe.
Yeah. So it starts with like a solid list, which takes weeks in some cases to plan.
It takes months, yeah.
Months.
Because you got to figure out like, well, you've got to have all the data in place. You've got to know what you're kind of looking for. You want accounts that are going to come in and actually engage with you. You want accounts that are going to close, and you want them to close for a really high value. And if you've not got the data set up in the first place to be able to show you what's working in an account in your current company in terms of customers, you can't make that list. So it's all kind of, I mean, ABM's all communication, isn't it? It's finding out that kind of customer data, figuring out what works for you, finding that list, and maybe even like different services have different lists and things like that.
Sounds like I'm a botch job then, eh? Just like hacking it together. Fourth question from Matt Leibon. What are the innovative ways people are researching their target accounts? So that's quite a fitting question.
Yeah, that is a really fitting question after that. So what I'd say is like, it's really different company to company.
Yeah.
And this is where, like, if you start to work in different programs over time, you start to realize that you need different account data and different filters and things like that to sort out your accounts. So I think like a good example of this would be Lilt. We sold a translation AI technology. And one of the things that we looked for and scored quite heavily toward was the number of languages currently on their website, because that would indicate a higher contract spend. But obviously that is completely redundant if you're not looking at translation. We're looking now, so the special part of SecurityHQ is that we have managed security operation centers, 24/7, humans looking at the systems, he's finding out what's going into them. So one of the things that we're looking for, particularly when we look for partners, is that they don't have their own managed SOC. They're quite hard to set up. And that's something that we're getting an intern to look at websites manually, is something that we can't figure out in terms of data. But again, we'll like weight that scoring really heavily towards that, because that's such a valuable piece of data. So I wouldn't say there's anything innovative. There's often not like a technology solution. You just got to find out what the certain thing is that makes accounts work for you and drill down into that.
Yeah. So no golden goose tool then. It's more of just the people that put in the work, the hard work. What your intern is.
It's about like understanding your company basically. There's going to be AI tools that you can use to go and find the research after you've figured out what you're looking for. But I think that's the crux of AI, right? If you have no idea what you want it to find out for you, I think we used to describe it as the world's smartest toddler. So if you don't give it direction, then it'll have no idea what to look for and you're not going to get much back.
I like that a lot. The next question is coming from Mariska van Bukering. I hope I haven't butchered her surname. Lovely lady. This is a tough one as well. I think they get easier. But how are companies embedding diversity and inclusion into their marketing strategy?
Wow. Honestly, I don't really know. I think, again, at Lilt, it was fairly easy. We sold through different languages. So you could use different languages. And I understand the power of localizing messaging and things like that to diverse communities. In reality, in SecurityHQ, it's not necessarily that important. I think in most tech marketing, it's not necessarily that important. Your message shouldn't change.
I did ask a marketer that once, and Mariska's very, very bullish on it, and I think it's definitely got a place. Whereas like some other people have given me feedback saying like when it comes to them actually making a decision on the deal, like how much is that going to value, like is that going to push the deal over the line ultimately? And like a lot of them were arguing no.
Well, I think it's an internal thing in my mind. It's something that makes your company great, but it doesn't necessarily need to be said in marketing to push a needle.
I can see that. The next question from Joe Minchin. He asked, what do you do? I know you're experiencing this. What do you do within an organization when there are a diverse range of understandings as to what ABM is?
All right, yeah, we've just been talking about this. The answer is education, essentially.
Yeah.
It's if a company has taken the decision to bring in someone like me and to bring in ABM structures,
Yeah.
it usually means that there's not ABM structures currently in place. I mean, I usually come in as the first ABM hire. Maybe other people are quite lucky to be joining ABM teams. I've not necessarily seen that too much. But you are going to have to go in and change fundamental structures to how go-to-market is working. And a lot of people are going to be going to want to be really involved in that decision. So it's about finding your senior stakeholders, your head of sales, your CEO, your CMO, and getting them all on the same page, getting them to understand what the kind of vision is and get them to understand how this thing can kind of scale and how it aligns to what their growth targets are.
Yep.
And talk them to death about it until they're kind of on board, essentially. If you don't have those guys on board, you're not gonna win.
For sure, and ideally get them all on the same call at the same time.
Yeah.
The next is from, I love this question, Emily York Goldney. She asked, if the sky was the limit in terms of budget, what would be your, and please be as unconventional as possible here, what would be your best-in-class recommendation for a campaign to drive account engagement?
It's really interesting. So like a top one account, dream account type thing.
And you've got unlimited budget. So yeah, what are you doing? What gets your attention?
Well, the boring answer is I think that ABM can be done within a budget. Definitely. I think that's kind of the point of it. It's reduced resources. But then I suppose...
You've just made yourself the most hireable ABM manager.
Yeah, maybe. I think I started off my career doing a lot of direct mail campaigns.
Right.
I worked at an audio agency and we sent out Bluetooth speakers with our pitch recorded onto the Bluetooth speaker. So they turned it on and they heard our pitch. And we found that because it was relevant, people would get to the end of like a 2-minute 30 pitch. If you imagine that in an email,
I love that, yeah.
That's basically an essay in an email. That's amazing. And we got like a 30% reply rate to that, which is quite big for an advertising agency. So I think it would be some kind of direct mail campaign. I remember KPMG have like the biggest one I've ever seen, where they got VR headsets for a whole learning and development department in an enterprise, and it was loaded up with learning and development, but they got to keep the headsets afterwards. I think if you're trying to get engagement, that's probably the best way to go about it.
That's actually, yeah, I guess the gift you're giving them has to be relevant to what you're, like my head went to like just give them a Rolls Royce or something, but
if you're selling cars, then
if you're selling cars, yeah. Although I worked at Rolls Royce, it's probably not the best strategy. Right, quick fire because I'm conscious of time. Vasilios Kospanos asked, with the demise of cookies, what will companies like Sixth Sense and Terminus do? Do they have any place? What's their future look like? And for marketers, what does the future look like?
Yeah, I think they'll struggle. If I'm honest, we used intent. I've always used intent data. If I'm honest, I used it as a BDR. I think what we found, especially when the companies get larger and things like work from home are more ubiquitous, the locations can't necessarily be trusted a lot of the time. And it doesn't matter if you're getting a signal from, say, Atlanta, if you're looking at Coca-Cola or something like that, there's 60,000 employees there. There's no way that you're going to find a person that's Googled it. It's why I'm so heavily invested in things like account scoring, because I think, in my opinion, that's all about finding the right time. In my opinion, with ABM, the right time can wait if you've got the perfect account, because you're looking at it as someone that will engage, that will sign, and will sign for a really high value. Those kind of real big needle movers, essentially. In my opinion, it's much better to identify that account, get in touch with them, find out when the timing is, even if it's kind of 9 to 12 months out, and then you can nurture them for 9 to 12 months. Until that timing is there, you don't necessarily need those signals.
Okay, RIP intent data. Ryan Malloyne asked, what is the biggest marketing risk you've ever taken, for better or worse?
It's tough. I've just said that I really operate on tight budgets, so I suppose the risk is probably more me putting myself out of my comfort zone. I think we ran a series of happy hours at Lilt, and they were nervy occasions, because you're spending a decent amount of budget and aiming at decision makers, and we didn't have a lot of kind of like brand presence and things like that. So I think we got 28 to our first one or something
bad.
like that, which is, it's not bad. We aimed for 50, but then it kind of came out smelling like roses, I would say. We got a signed client quite quickly off it. I would encourage happy hours.
Yeah, you did ruin it, happy hour. Well, the next question then, it came in earlier today from Erica Smith. She asked, how are you getting people to events? Obviously, you just touched on it there. It's a real challenge. Like, any hidden tricks?
No. It's pretty hard work and quite sleepless nights, I would say. But then I didn't enjoy it at all, if I'm honest. I didn't enjoy the kind of organising of it or anything like that. Felt like it was in high school again. Will people turn up to my party type vibes?
Oh yeah, it's horrible.
I think it was just a lot of emails. I think towards the end, we lowered the barrier to entry and things like that. So it's kind of target the really high value people first. And then when you know that there's 10 people coming, start to get some room fillers, I suppose.
Moving the parameters of success. The next question, Sudhir Kumar. Oh, nice. What book would you recommend and why? So not ABM related necessarily.
That's quite difficult.
As in, you don't read much, or you've got like loads of books?
I've not read for a long time. Yeah. I suppose we were talking the other day. Well, I really enjoy Freakonomics. I think that's kind of. I think if you approach ABM with that kind of logical thinking mindset, then that would work.
Nice.
But yeah, I suppose. I've learned to. I did an English lit degree as well. I'm letting myself down, but I've learned to consume content differently over the years.
Next question from Karina Owens. I like this. So like, snog, marry, avoid, kiss, marry, kill. I don't know what it is, but she asked, within ABM, what would you contract, fire, and scale?
Interesting. So I would definitely contract out PPC ads. Things all those, like the kind of performance marketing things. I think there's a lot of people, I've just never had it internally, and it's a kind of bit of a blind spot for me, especially if you've already got those account scores out. There's people that are out there that can do it freelance and very creatively, very well, essentially. I think I'd fire intent data. I think we've already covered that. But that's, I think also just kind of general like catalyst-led campaigns. I'm not a huge fan of, just because I think there's, like I said before, if you can identify those accounts and find the timing, then you can kind of work towards that time set. Not necessarily have to use these triggers where people feel like they're being pushed to buy, because I think that's the point of ABM, is that the power is moving towards that buyer, I suppose. And then what was the other one? Marry. Scale. Well, it's account scoring. I banged on that. Yeah, banged on about account scoring. But the thing. So you kind of, once you understand it, it should be a living score the whole time, because you should be adapting. Maybe you're changing the type of companies that you want to go and prospect, and you can start to adjust the scoring there. Maybe you notice that an industry, something like the Nordics going on holiday for 2 months.
Yeah.
How do we find a way through scoring to drop out all Nordic companies just for those 2 months and have this as a living list? I think that's probably the biggest thing to scale across a company.
Interesting. I know you've got your own spreadsheets as well for that one. Rachel Locke said, what's your favorite event you've ever been to? And you can't say little happy hours, I guess.
That's all right.
Professional event.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think is where she was going with that.
I think it's probably when I was a salesperson, because I did quite well out of the event. But and now I kind of work to do as many events like this as possible. It was called the Martech Summit. And there was about 200 C-suite enterprise kind of decision makers there, and there was only 20 vendors in the room. So it kind of gave you an opportunity to go and do a discovery call with every.
What was it called?
It was the Martech Summit, but I think there's loads of like summit style events essentially around there. But any place that you can get to, like, those face-to-face meetings are so valuable. I think when there's less sellers and they're kind of there to learn, their guard is down a little bit, and as long as you approach it in the right way, you could, like I said, you can essentially do discovery calls through the room, get people straight into demo after that, and get quite a quick sales cycle after that.
This is a great ad for Martech Summit. Davis Potter said, how do you see the convergence of demand gen and ABM taking place?
You won't be surprised to hear me say account scoring. As long as they're, I think it was similar to that question before, as long as everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet, messaging is aligned and you're kind of going out to the same people, that's how you don't necessarily need those functions to talk as long as they are working off the same account list.
Okay. Brandon Aliasglu, how are people scoring email opens for attribution was his first question. And then his second question was, and I think we discussed this last week, how wide do you push an email marketing campaign? So if you're tagged in an account, obviously you can go after, it depends how many stakeholders you've got, but you can go very wide with it. What's your...
So is this for marketing or for business development?
For marketing, well, marketing will set up like an outreach campaign, I guess, rather than the BDRs.
So I would push it quite wide, but it's when I have something to push, I suppose. So I would do, for example, the happy hour. That was marketing email blasts to send out, but it's only when you've got something quite big and shiny to offer. I would say email campaigns I usually reserve for business development, and it's so that we don't push far and wide that much at all. What we're doing is we're looking at these accounts that we've pre-selected for them. We're identifying buying committees and we're sending a tailored message out to each person in that buying committee. And so we're not, I suppose you do scale that out over time, but each of the accounts is going to get specialized messaging.
Right, so as long as there's value going to the stakeholders, you're willing to reach out to those people. But if it's just kind of, hey, we're talking with so-and-so, it's not necessarily...
Yeah, absolutely. I think deliverability has gone massively down since I started my career. So things like marketing emails are just, I worry sometimes that they don't get read. And so you need this kind of big spread to kind of get any kind of results from them. BDRs have a little chance if they personalize, I suppose.
Yeah, finding pig farms or something, yeah. Next question was from Spencer Geegan. He asked, beyond making content, how are marketers using AI?
Interesting. For all manner of things, I would say. That's a very broad question. I think I mentioned the kind of AI research before. I know you've looked into AI research where we can kind of, I think a lot of the time, again, you need to kind of figure out what you want it to look for. But a lot of the time, if we can spring up to a salesperson, almost like a meeting pre-brief that tells them things like revenue, any account changes, signals, I think ZoomInfo called them scoops and things like that. They're really good and they're kind of really good context ahead of a call. And I suppose you can use that to create your messages as well. I don't think anything beats human research still, because it's not necessarily about identifying research, it's about identifying research and then bringing it back to what you sell. And an AI is going to struggle to do that unless you teach it a very, very specific thing. What I will use it for definitely is kind of process content creation. So things like if I need to describe a persona to PDRs, now I don't have to sit down and write out that whole thing. I can ask it to explain the role of the CIO in cybersecurity and then go and edit afterwards. And I've saved myself probably 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, and the rest, if you do that for every ICP. Great answer. Next question, Christina Jaramillo. She asked, how do you do your homework to know if ABM is even right for you? So not even I guess more into that justification.
I suppose this is where I show how kind of indoctrinated I am. I think ABM is appropriate at kind of every level, in my opinion. I don't think there's a situation that ABM is right for or isn't right for necessarily. It's just kind of a way of thinking about go-to-market. So I suppose where I've seen it best deployed is where a company wants to use less human resource, so less BDRs, and have them put out more quality work, essentially. I don't know about homework. I think a lot of the time you need someone like myself or someone else that's been involved in ABM setups or building ABM setups to come in and talk to you. It's not necessarily a new thing, but it's kind of goes against what thinking has been in sales and go-to-market for the last 5 years or so. And so it does kind of take a changing of structures. There's never anything that you can't adapt to do ABM, and you can start doing it straight away as well, basically. So I think, you just basically need to start doing it. You don't necessarily need to do homework.
You live and breathe it, don't you? I love it. Final question was from Evan Stinson. What are some creative ways to reach non-technical audiences?
Interesting. I mean, I'm a salesman, really. That's kind of the crux of it. And so I would hope that you're selling something non-technical in the first place, but then it's figuring out what the benefit of using a tool or using your service is to a non-technical person.
Yep.
It's often strategic if they're senior. It's often workflow if they're non-senior. There's always going to be something that's going to engage them. And then I think like a lot of people get excited by bells and whistles and things like events. A lot of the time, all that is a technique to engage someone so that you can pitch them in a good way. And as long as you have that pitch nailed down and you're able to talk to someone, then you should be able to engage them in kind of whatever way that you'd want to.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. It's human to human marketing at the end of the day. Right, there are all the questions. The one last thing I will ask you, well, there's a bit of time left. It keeps cropping up, and I know you answered it in episode 2. Aligning marketing and sales. Like, how are you bridging that gap? How are you winning them over? Like,
sure. So,
how much info as well? Because too much info is overwhelming to them, and they don't use it. Too little info, well, that's not going to help anyone.
It's account scoring and data. So I think what you get is a lot of opinions across. You get kind of really strong characters that rise to the top of marketing and sales, like sales particularly. And so you'll get a lot of kind of opinion-based debate. A lot of them will kind of only see, they're not necessarily looking at the whole oversight of the company, and so they can use anecdotal evidence that they've recently, maybe they've had 2 good meetings in financial services recently, and so they want the whole company to change to a financial services focus. And that doesn't necessarily represent what's happening in the rest of the company. So if you gather this data, and it is data to track, so the things that I like to track are the average score of meetings. So once I've got that scoring in place, if that is rising, that's a good thing. The average kind of score of opportunities, so what's converting, and then the average deal size. If they're all going in the right way, then they're all working well. And if you can show that data to salespeople to say, actually, whilst you might have had these good experiences in financial services, we only get a 30% conversion rate through to stage 3 or something like that with them, whereas we get a much higher one in manufacturing, say.
Yep.
That's really hard to argue against. So it's about kind of getting everything prepared from your side, using that data to affect the scoring, and then eventually it takes a little bit of time, but after 3 to 6 months or so where everyone's happy because everyone's eating well and everyone's making loads of money basically, they start to go, well, maybe we should trust this system.
Giving them just like you can't argue against it, visual, like, here's how you're going to make lots of money.
It's interesting you think that, here's what the whole company looks like. I wonder why your experience is different. Are you doing something else in your financial services calls that makes you so good at this? And kind of.
So given making it 2-way, they can argue back and like
maybe they're like really good at regulations or something like that, and we just need to upskill the rest of the salesmen, and then we can go for that. But until you have that data, you can't start having that conversation.
Well, I'm out of questions. Do you have a question for our next guest?
I hadn't thought of one. I suppose let's go for like a dream tech stack. What would be someone's dream if money was no object? What's the dream tech stack?
Solid question. Okay, I'll ask it. Thank you very much, Henry.
No worries.
Funnels and metrics, watch them converge. Data and insight where the truths emerge. Pressures like bullets, sharp and fleet. Marketing game strong, you can't be beat.